Okay, right. Welcome to the meeting of the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education, 29th of November. We'll just go through the agenda. So apologies for absence. So we have Penny Coppin-Siddle, Ian Hodgson, Ben Rich, Kirsty Wordsworth, Taco Nichols, Councillor Fiona Fitzpatrick, Councillor Martin Rowley, and we have Maxine Squire on dial. Hello, can you hear us?
I can, yes, I can hear you very well. Thanks.
Right, very good. So you're coming through. Right. Okay, that takes us on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Any to declare? No? Okay. That brings us on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting and matters arising. Now, just to preface that, as we don't have all groups represented, we are not quorate. Therefore, we couldn't approve the minutes, even if we wanted to. But what we can do is just a check that they are accurate, so that when we are in a position to vote them through, but there's no addendums needed. So I'm just checking. Everyone's happy with that. Okay. So that brings us on to the draft. Yes.
Excuse me, Chair. Page 2, item 29, third paragraph, second bullet point. Do we have such a thing as a proselytizing religion? Or is it a proselytizing religion?
Okay,
it's a catchy title.
That will be, can be corrected for the next time you need to approve the minutes. No other items on that. Just checking. Right. Okay, so the draft annual report.
Okay, Chair, if I just start with this, the draft annual report follows the template laid down by National SACRE Association and also some of the revisions required by the Department for Education in the last couple of years. So we followed that template exactly in putting forward these different sections. One section, obviously, that we will need input around is the introduction from the chair. And this report always refers to the previous academic year. So this is the academic year 21-22, which ran from September 21 to July 2022, during which obviously we had 2 chairs. So Olivia and I felt it would be important to reflect that within the draft introduction to the report. As you know, Chair, the meeting's not quorate this evening, which means that we need to get a quorate meeting in place to sign this off before it's actually submitted to NASACRE as our final report. So it does give us some time to talk about the sections, but also as well time to draft any amendments, and also to allow the chair's introductory remarks to actually be drafted as well and finalised. Olivia, do you want to add anything?
I think probably just to highlight that what we're light on this year in our annual report is work around our standards and monitoring, but what we have tried to reflect is some of the plans that are in place through the new development plan. So our sort of intention for going forward. And obviously we've had quite a number of changes in terms of membership. So that's why that section is highlighted, because we just need to clarify what the membership was during last year as opposed to what the current membership is. It's always that challenge of looking backwards, isn't it, and remembering in terms of that academic year. It is due, the deadline that is given by DFE is the end of December this academic year. However, there is a recognition by both DFE and the SACRE that the timing of SACRE meetings do not always sit neatly with that end of the calendar year date. So I think as long as we are submitting it in some point in January, then that is well within the expected time, because there will be other SACREs apart from ourselves where they have a January meeting rather than a December meeting, and they're submitting it slightly late. So we've got, I think, that little bit of a wriggle room in order to submit it.
Okay, thanks for that. I think in just in terms of the point that was raised, the introduction from the chair, I understand that Councillor Cuthbertson, you had drafted something as you
yes,
do.
I've sent an email with some thoughts in it,
Right,
to Maxine, and I think we can develop those up to a point.
okay, so just mindful that the majority of the period 2021-22, it would be yourself.
Yes.
And I was not a member of the committee, so I would be reliant on people who were there to be able to comment on what took place.
There is also some guidance in the template from DFE, Chair, that sort of recommends the information that goes in that introduction as well. So that hopefully will give some guidance around membership and reflecting the work of SACRE during that year.
Okay,
are there any observation comments? People,
if I may, Chair, I'll have some respect for that template and home in on the details with Maxine.
Are there any comments about the changes that we need to make?
I'm sorry.
Are there any comments about changes that we need to make? Because I think it would be helpful if members were able to comment if there's anything they've spotted that is missing or incorrect, so that we can make those changes before the meeting where it's approved would be really helpful. We've written it as officers, but it's your report, if you know something.
I think one of the things, if I may share, is that would be worth mentioning is the fact that we've met in 2 York schools during the year. And that was, I'm not going to pretend that it was inspirational, but at least it was a start down a path that we might pursue. Maxine may want to comment on that, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's it's an important point actually for us to add in, Ian, that we actually did meet in schools. And also I think the other thing that we might want to mention as well, which we haven't mentioned, is that we have had presentations from a couple of different faith groups as well during that year as part of the meetings. Yeah. So we did have our humanist member who gave a presentation at one of those school meetings, and then obviously we had the Buddhist presentation as well.
And we had some interesting input from our 2 RE teachers.
Yeah.
The 2 RE teachers who were with us from the beginning of the year. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Any other comments that people would like to raise? Okay, before we we move on, conscious that, Olivia, you said that this contains reference to monitoring in that's been put in place. Time moves on, and therefore, just to make sure that we have the information to put into next year's report, we need to do that, and therefore, I think it would be helpful to understand what we ought to be doing for this current time, to make sure that we do have it.
Certainly, Chair, and I think some of that is reflected in the new development plan. Some of you may remember I brought a report to members. I think it was the last meeting, possibly the meeting before. Apologies, I can't remember the exact date. With some suggestions to members about the different activities that we could do in order to monitor standards in RE ongoing. Some of that will come through the monitoring questionnaire being sent out again during this academic year. That is a starting point for gathering a picture across all of the schools. Some of that is through different activities that SACRE would need to discern themselves. So the development plan does have within it some items related to that, but some of that can come through pupil voice and staff voice activities. Some of that can come through monitoring school websites to look at curriculum representation on there, because we know that all schools are statutorily required to put their curriculum on their website. NATRE nationally does have a document to support SACRE members in monitoring school websites. And the other way is through monitoring of data. Now, of course, what isn't in this report, because it hasn't been released yet, is for secondary schools, the Key Stage 4 and 5 data. But in our spring term meeting, looking at that data for York, alongside looking at the workforce data, which schools themselves, secondary again, I'm afraid, but submit workforce data, is again another way in which as SACRE members we can look at what is that telling us about standards in RE and secondary, and what might we do as a result of that. For our primary schools, it is really through auditing of school websites, planned visits to schools, the school questionnaire, and pupil and staff voices is the range of ways in which we can build a picture about the quality of provision in our schools.
Thank you for that. Okay, so anyway, just on item 4, don't worry that there's yes, the other members of the committee were impacted by the traffic. So, right. So just to explain, unfortunately, we're not quoried because of each. So, but I thought it was important to go through the business so that when we are in a position to, we are able to have ironed out any creases before it becomes something ready to vote on. So item 6, the development plan 22-24. Olivia, are you speaking to that, or is Maxine? Maxine, voice from above.
Yeah, obviously in developing the development plan, I took on board some of the discussions that we'd had during the year around areas where we feel there's a need to identify specific actions to support the work of SACRE. The other thing that some of this is, we've already completed some of these actions. So, for example, the updating of contacts so that we've got contacts from each of the schools confirming who their RE lead is, both in primary and secondary. I did that earlier in the term. So we have now got an up-to-date list of contacts, so that rather than relying on generic school emails, we can actually go through to who the named RE lead is. Again, we've looked at areas of the plan which relate back to the the framework provided by SACRE around areas of work that it's important for SACREs to be looking at. And I also wrote the development plan thinking about the resources that we have available to us as well, to ensure that we are able to deliver on actions and that they're meaningful in terms of that work around the quality of RE in the city. One of the things that we felt it was important to do was really focus on how the SACRE has a higher presence with schools, and so improving communication through things like a termly newsletter was one of the things that we felt was a useful start around that. I'm also going to follow up on the recent competition that was done by York Interfaith to ask schools to join a competition around a logo for York Interfaith Week. That's raised some areas where we feel it's useful to follow up around perhaps some misconceptions that there might be out there around some of our local religious groups. So that's something that we feel we can actually follow up on during the year. Do you want to add anything, Olivia?
No, I think the previous question about, I suppose, about monitoring standards in RE, priority 3 and 4, I think highlight some of the ways in which we've built that into the development plan, and particularly around sharing good practice, those visits to schools, and that sense of being able to identify the good practices going on so that teachers can learn from one another. And I think there's a great opportunity through Andy's wonderful work in leading the primary RE group, and I know there are challenges often in terms of attendance, but that work's really important, and we're really grateful, Andy, that you do that. And Taco, who's unfortunately not here this evening, but he has just agreed to lead a secondary NatRe local group for the city as well, and so I'm working with him to support him in setting that up with my regional lead hat on. So I think there are 2 other opportunities to engage with schools and to look at ways of getting feedback from schools about how we can support them and doing the work that they do.
Thank you. Any comments that people want to raise on this plan? I was just going to raise the school visits. How are they being arranged?
I think Maxine, I don't know if you can answer that about school visits and how they'll be. Okay. Apologies. Sorry, Maxine, I don't know if you have a perspective on how the school visits will be arranged.
Yeah, I think in terms of arranging school visits, obviously, I think it's better to begin to start with areas where we might want to showcase best practice to begin with. So what I'm going to suggest is that I work with Taco and with Andy to actually draw up some areas where we know interesting things are happening and arrange the school visits that way.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just conscious that there are times of the year schools like visits, and there are times that do not. That we just need to be mindful of the pressures on teachers and so work with them. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Seems to me that given the limited resources we've got in the way of officers, this really will need to be a member-led project if it's going to work. And when I say member, I don't mean local authority member, I mean SACRE member. And that's not a huge commitment, but I certainly think we ought to make some attempt to understand what's going on in schools. That knowledge is patchy in its distribution across the membership of this group, but think that they would respond, schools generally will respond to an outside interest, and that's perhaps the route that we go down, and try not to make it too much of a burden for members of SACRE, but try to spread the load fairly evenly, but certainly let schools know that we are interested, and that, for instance, the questionnaire could also reflect that. Those are my thoughts at this point, Chair.
I'd certainly agree with that in terms of also that helps to raise the profile of SACRE as well with schools, that they get a visit from members of SACRE, so that you know, it's that opportunity for them to develop their understanding of why this is a statutory committee.
Olivia?
And I think certainly when we started our training for membership last year, one of the things that was due to happen was training for members about the context of RE in schools. And I think doing that piece of training as a SACRE first, and then everyone feeling confident and equipped to go in and visit schools, I think would be really helpful.
If I may, Chair, the visits into schools, I think would be, as Councillor Cuthbertson suggested, would be more, sorry, get my teeth in, would be well received. I think it would be more positively received if it came as a very friendly, supportive, and rather than we're here to see what you're doing. We're here to celebrate what you're doing, and we're really keen and excited, and just having that positivity to and through that potentially create the opportunities to offer any advice, but also more generally to find out what's going on. And I think teachers would be more accepting to that, as opposed to worrying about obviously any sort of. Yeah.
I don't think it would be appropriate
No.
for SACRE members to go in to do a what we might call it a school improvement style visit. We do have a legal remit and monitoring standards, but there are mechanisms for doing that in terms of the officers. So it would absolutely be about going in a bit like in a governor role, seeing things in action, as opposed to making any sort of judgments about what is going on. It's about actually getting to know our schools better by going in and seeing what's happening and talking to and hearing from teachers.
Narish?
I don't know whether the situation has changed recently, but some years back, any request for visit to the schools would go direct to head teacher, and the head teacher having to juggle things around, often for the faith community would have been put at the last option. And I wonder whether this approach to the schools could be directed to the lead RE teacher, whether it is possible, because RE teacher will have a better idea of what, well, I don't undermine the teachers, but I think that might be better.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbertson?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a good point. I think that probably approaching an RE lead direct without any reference to the head teacher wouldn't go down very well. So I think, we need to get a cooperative approach on that one. I think the other thing is that our RE teachers could probably do some informal, might not be training, but it could be kind of awareness raising of how to deal with the school visit. I mean, we don't want teachers feeling that they've got another would-be Ofsted on their backs. It definitely must not be a judgmental thing, more an acquaintance and a kind of a finding out visit, almost sharing rather than taking or commanding. You see what I mean? I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the visits would be coordinated through the primary and secondary contacts. So in terms of developing a timeline of visits that could take place, and that could be then circulated around the committee so that availability could be checked.
Yeah, the plan would be officer led,
Yes.
and then but with the need for various members to be part of that, so that it has impact, and that members on visits, but officers would lead, I suppose, the plan to bring to members, to enable all members to be part of it. I think is probably the most practical way to make that happen.
Okay. Conscious we need to get on with these, so that could be organised by email without there being these meetings. We can do it in between these meetings.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah. The work of SACRE can continue
Yes.
between meetings and be reported then in the next meeting. Absolutely.
Right. So officers will prepare a scheme of potential visits. People could indicate their availability, and that way we get the coverage, and the schools are fully aware of who's coming and why, and that there is comfort in it being an information gathering process, and not anything untoward.
My recommendation would be that potentially for the February meeting, that some member training about school visits would be helpful. We had last academic year talked about keeping that training plan ongoing with input for members, and there are training materials linked with SACRE for these different functions of SACRE, so we could provide some training, as we've done in the past, a short input of training prior to the SACRE meeting,
Right.
that would support members in their understanding.
So that would be the hour before.
Yes, or
Right.
whatever works.
Right. Okay, anything else on the plan? Well, if we're happy to receive that. So the National Aryan Collective Worship updates.
So members have received the paper. Obviously, it was written a little while ago. There have been some developments for some of the things that I have provided for you here, but I suppose one of the key items just to make SACRE aware of in terms of national and regional developments in religious education is the work of the regional RE hubs. There is now a national lead for religious education, which is Claire Clinton, who is working nationally with the various RE organisations such as SACRE, ARIAC, NATRE, working with the DFE, so that there is a national picture in terms of RE development. And then there have been 10 regional leads appointed who fit the government regions in England and in Wales. We've got a Welsh regional lead as well. And their strategic roles to connect with all those involved with RE development in their regions. So that is all the SACREs, that is universities, whether that be in terms of initial teacher education or in terms of theology and religious studies provision. It's teaching school hubs, it's multi-academy trusts, it's all the different key players, if you like, in terms of teacher development. So the project for the regional leads began in October. You'll see that, apologies in advance, that I am the Yorkshire and Humber regional lead. And so my role, as I say, began in October. And so I am contacting all those different people. But alongside the work in gathering that picture for the region, there will be a national website that will, so Yorkshire and Humber will have a regional page, and there are opportunities for anyone who is providing CPD for teachers, anybody who is providing advice and support to feature. So for example, York SACRE would be able to put on there any CPD that they're offering for teachers and information about how schools can contact York SACRE. So it is a great opportunity for teachers who may not be aware of the work of York SACRE locally, there's another way for them to find out about what is offered to them locally. There is also, and I'm aware that Interfaith York in particular are aware that we're currently running training for school speakers and places of worship, with the opportunity after that initial training to be provided with a kite mark that says that that individual has attended training and received that kite mark, and then will feature on this national website, so that when schools go to the regional page, they will be able to see who they can invite into school, places of worship they can visit that have done this basic training for working with schools. So I know that Darius and others have already signed up for that training. It's happening nationally. So I think that will be a great resource for schools to know, both in their local area, but also those that are offering it on a regional and a national scale, that confidence to know who they can engage with in terms of faith communities, places of interest. So museums and other places of interest that RE can be on that as well. So there's much still to come. So I'll be able to provide more of an update in the spring term, but I do hope that's something that York SACRE will be able to engage with ongoing. There are other updates in there as well for you. In particular, the still standing Future of SACRE's report is a report that I would encourage us as members perhaps to spend some time looking at a future meeting. It is written based on the annual reports and other work that SACRE have been doing, and giving some advice and support to SACREs and how they can develop in their work. So again, I think that might be a useful report if we're wanting to think about what are our next steps in terms of our SACRE development. But happy to take any questions if there's anything that you wanted to unpick from the report.
Thank you. Just conscious, Maxine, do you want to come in? Because you can't. There's no way of indicating other than.
No, no.
Right.
No, that's absolutely fine. Olivia's covered the main points. As she said, the move to these regional hubs is something that that is part of the framework around supporting different curriculum areas nationally. It does give some opportunities for us to think about how we want to support the development of RE in York in the future. And obviously we want to ensure that we're linked in with some of these regional structures going forward.
Okay, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it might be very useful if Olivia could let members of SACRE know how to apply for the kite mark training so that they can then fly unaccompanied.
So the flyer has been sent to faith representatives from York SACRE. So it's the training is for faith communities, speakers into schools, and so it has been sent to SACRE members and also sent via Penny to Interfaith York, so that members of Interfaith York who don't sit on SACRE but do engage with our schools locally are aware of it. So we are encouraging, and there have been some people from our region broader than York, of course, I'm thinking Yorkshire and Humber, that have already attended the training.
Andy, did you want to come in on that? It was a question I was going to raise about how could people who would be schools would be interested in hearing from, but who are not members of SACRE, how would they know? But you're letting them know, Penny.
So at the moment, through the launch of the agreed syllabus, Interfaith York wrote some information for us that was shared with schools so that they know how to access local people who visit schools. And so in this new role as regional lead, I contacted Interfaith York with the flyer so that they can choose, if they wish to apply for the training. It's free training and appear on the website, and it's been sent to other contacts that I know of in the region as well. So that's been part of my role, is to send it to anybody, not just in York, but in the wider region that is a visiting speaker or a place of worship. So that's what I've been doing.
I was going to say, we have circulated it to the management committee, haven't we? But it could, I'm not sure that we've sent it out to everyone. Not everyone on our list is a faith member. So we haven't kind of generally circulated it. But we have to those who are faith members on the committee to pass it out to their congregations and their membership, so that they would know if there's anyone else, filtering it out that way. But we can remind everyone again. That's always good, isn't it? I need reminding. So,
right. Thank you for doing that and recruiting people. Any other questions on that? So Interfaith Week. And did you want to do an update on? Oh.
sorry, I'm just making a note to remind people.
Right. Oh, well, that's that. But no, I'm like you. If I don't do it there and then.
Dariush, please comment if there's something that you'd like to say. I think we had a very successful Interfaith Week. It's always very busy in York, which is good because people do like to contribute and to show the variety of faiths and religions that we have in York, and we always get a very good support. This year we experimented a little with a competition working with SACRE. It was a new step for us, wasn't it? We've never done, and we're really appreciative of Maxine and Olivia who guided us in doing that, and you came on board, Councillor Waller, which was great. So we had our logo competition. Ralph Butterfield's primary school did brilliantly in their submissions and winning entries. And it seemed overall to be a really good way of connecting with schools. We, other than visits, we don't really connect. And we have had people come to us since working with you, Olivia, and kind of flagging us up as a place to come for visits. We have had people contact us. But it's difficult, other than, my own children who are at school or college, for us as a group to interact and find a way to interact with schools and children in York, and having this competition allowed us to do that. I think there's some things to learn from it. If we did something different, I think it would be good to repeat not necessarily the logo competition, but to do something else on an ongoing basis, so that schools become educated that, oh yes, we're going to engage with York Interfaith and SACRE and learn something in the process of whatever we do, whether it's a piece of artwork or poetry or whatever we decide. But if it becomes a more regular thing, and perhaps with a bit more time ahead for schools, it's a little bit short, I think, just because that's the way it worked this year. It did flag up some things. So we had lots of entries that had Clifford's Tower on it. And so it flagged up perhaps a need for schools to educate the children a little bit more about the history and the things that happened at Clifford's Tower, because as an interfaith group, that isn't something that we would choose to have on our logo because of the connections with the Jewish faith and the massacre that happened there. So that's something I didn't expect that we'd kind of discover. And sometimes, as Olivia pointed out, there's a great opportunity for in-classroom kind of discussion and thought and guidance and education that perhaps didn't quite take place this year. And again, that's a matter of engaging with schools and teachers, I think, and saying, can we have a little bit more in classroom discussion about whatever it is that we're doing that educates them? So the children didn't understand about Clifford's Tower, and perhaps it wasn't at the forefront of teachers' minds to say, oh, you know, what can we think about here if we're doing a logo? Oh, we flagged up, please don't use the Minster, because that's of a particular faith, and we wanted to be inclusive of all faiths and beliefs. So we kind of said, you know, please don't, which is an obvious thing to use, isn't it? If I was a child, I'd go, oh, the Minster, that would be lovely in the middle of my logo. But perhaps it hadn't flagged up to me. Maybe it did to you about Clifford's Tower. When you saw it presented, you think, yes, we all need to be a little bit more aware of those things. Did you want to say something, Olivia?
I know we started this piece of work, didn't we, with the launch of the agreed syllabus, where faith members of SACRE provided some information sheets about faith communities in York. And I think this is probably highlights another opportunity to re-highlight those fact sheets, but potentially a little bit more work we can do as a SACRE to provide some information about faith communities in York, so that they can use that resource to bring alive the RE that's happening in the classroom, because any syllabus will talk about Jewish people, Muslim people, Sikh people, humanists, and more generically. But what we want our York schools to do is also to explore in the classroom about, well, what does it mean to be a Jewish person in York today? Or what does it mean to be a Baha'i person in York today? And to explore local faith communities. So I think there's a great opportunity there. And I think through that, we know through the exhibition that Ben wonderfully set up in the Castle Museum about our Jewish community in York, that was a rich resource. And I think that's a good example of something that we could build on to help our schools to learn about something of the history of the Jewish community in York and the lived reality of the Jewish community in York today. And that might help us to highlight some of those things that came up as part of that competition.
We're very grateful for the help of SACRE, because that allowed us to kind of communicate to schools in a way that we just can't do as a group. So that was really helpful to us and appreciated.
In addition to all those, also a side benefit, in my view, of people recognizing more about SACRE. I think even some of the teachers that have met, when I mentioned SACRE, they were scratching their head what SACRE stands for. And this has been a point of conversation amongst school children. I look at that for my grandchildren in secondary school, and with people also being involved in education, to recognize that there is a link between Interfaith and SACRE. And perhaps it has been a very good and positive experiment to develop for the following years during the Interfaith Week, to come up with other ideas that will be a joint effort of SACRE and Interfaith.
Just to say, I thought the competition was a really good idea, and actually, should there be capacity for something that happens regularly, I think that it gives schools something that they can latch onto, I think, and jump on board with, because quite often with Interfaith, there are lots of resources available online, but having a competition gives a solution to that. Oh, good, you know, this is how we can start to address Interfaith and raise its priority within the school. And in addition, and just speaking from experience, a lot of the decisions, sort of even picking entries and things, it has to be done under duress, if you like. There's very limited time. That looks really nice. That's fantastic. That's great. I really like the work they've put in the effort. And it might be, and quite possibly is, that the teachers, including myself, don't have that depth of local knowledge. So I'm not local. I've moved into the area. And equally wouldn't even think to check, especially with that duress of that issue of time. So something like a future competitions, I think, is a really good idea, but also sort of accompanying sort of just a short history and just awareness. And I think that would double up to help build awareness within schools and also give purpose to that information.
I know you run the RE hub, don't you? Or hub, you run something with RE teachers. Sorry, it might not be called a
the
hub.
local network meeting. Yeah.
Yes. So is that somewhere that we could tap into to kind of help teachers understand?
Yes, no, I absolutely think that would be a good way of providing teachers with the information. Again, a crib sheet supplying information key would be really beneficial, because that goes away, and afterwards, after a meeting, it's sort of late and there's 170 things to do. So having that available, certainly.
I think there's something for SACRE to consider in terms of, I know it's in the development plan about professional development for teachers. Subject knowledge is something not just locally but nationally is, I speak to lots of teachers in lots of different places, and routinely what I'm asked for is subject knowledge support alongside curriculum support. And so that, I think there's something to consider here for SACRE in terms of, you know, is there an opportunity to provide some subject knowledge networks that have a subject knowledge base to them, but also, for example, give some local knowledge about that particular community in York. That's something over time, but that I think it might be helpful in the spring term to be thinking about Interfaith Week 2023, so that we've got time, you know, because there's 2 meetings then before the Interfaith Week. But also I do think it's probably longer term important for SACRE to consider what subject knowledge training, what training and support we're providing for teachers to help address some of these things you've raised.
Oh, thank you. Just a thought whilst you're speaking. Interfaith Week is also, and I appreciate it's a national week, it's very close to other things that are going on. And if there is some issues within schools getting involved, it may be due to the closeness and proximity to things like Remembrance Sunday, to which the schools will be doing focus upon, an anti-bullying week, which is also very sort of nearby. Just a thought to see if there was any capacity to adjust the timing there within Yorks to allow it to clash with other priorities.
I don't think you can move Interfaith Week because it's a long-standing national institution, and it's very common during Interfaith Week nationally for schools to do things like faith carousels, have a visitors week, those sorts of things. But any competition or anything engaging with schools around Interfaith Week doesn't necessarily have to be squarely focused on that, does it? You know, there's capacity to do things over a longer period of time, but Interfaith Week itself is a very big national focus with government and others, you know, involved in it. So the date for Interfaith Week is what it is. I think.
Sadly, it's immovable. We have tried. We thought it better actually in the summer, but there's no movement with the Interfaith Network to move any date, and it connects in with Scotland as well. So, but I take your point that perhaps we could look at doing something at a different time of year.
Right, so we could look at some things in the run up to, and that would give more flexibility for schools, given other pressures on time. But I think you're right that if we consider it in the spring term, then it gives sufficient time to plan ahead. Okay, any other issues relating to Interfaith Week? If not, correspondence on complaints determination, item 9.
None received, Chair. So it is a standing item on the agenda.
That's good to hear. So we don't need to dwell on that. So 10 is the work plan. Right. Well, I'm just conscious that we're going to have to arrange a meeting in January, which will need to be correct. Is there something that could be added to that to make it even more attractive for people to come along to and guarantee attendance? Because we talked about some training.
Yeah, we can focus on getting the monitoring strand actually up and running.
Yes.
I think if we focus on that in the January meeting and we agree the programme of monitoring activities for the rest of 22-23. We may, as well, it's probably a little bit too early even then to have the information about the school standards in RE. I doubt if we'll actually get them that early in January. But if we do get any indications, then I'll bring something around that as well.
Right, that sounds like an indication on what we can bring to that meeting. So the monitoring. So would it be possible to provide an outline of visits later in that?
Yes. Yeah.
So people can say, yes, I can do that. I'll
Yeah.
talk about that. So that, I think that would be helpful if that could be circulated in advance of that meeting, so that.
And we can reshare the paper from the previous meeting, which outlined the range of different monitoring options. That there was a separate paper we had, so we can re-look at that in conjunction with the annual report to consider what actions we might want to take.
And equally from the other side of the inspection, of the visits, the feedback from schools and what they would be looking for if someone from SACRE turned up.
Yes.
What is it that they would want, so that we can marry the two and ensure that there's clarity on what the purpose of those visits would be. Right. So future meetings dates, well, it's the 1st of February 2023, but there is the added January meeting, which
Need to chase people for that.
so that will need to be done by email as it is critical. So okay, so that's to be announced. Okay, and we don't have any urgent business, so I'm bringing the meeting to close. Thank you all for attending.